All right, so today I've got the pleasure of hanging out with a dear friend and a wonderfully brilliant woman, Sarah Noyes. She is a HR professional. She's focused on recruiting and retaining top talent. She's been a recruiter for dozens of different companies. She's helped move through hundreds of different candidates. And what I like especially about her is so many of the companies that I talked to when we were writing Lead Together were not thrilled with either the effort or the results that they were getting with recruiting and diversity and inclusion. And Sarah's done not just a lot of thinking about this, but actually put this stuff into practice. And she got a lot of stuff that struck me as certainly uncommon practice, but also some clever ideas of solving these tricky problems of getting the best, most qualified people and the most diverse set of talent at the same time, which is always a balancing act that everybody's got to be considering when they're thinking about their teams and who they want to work with. So thank you, Sarah, so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Travis.
Oh, it's wonderful. How does an organization start and write a job description that gathers those qualified candidates from the diverse pool, since the top of the funnel is always the place to start?
First and foremost, just be upfront about compensation and benefits. This is definitely, thankfully, a growing trend for organizations, but is definitely applying a racial and social justice lens to recruitment and is assuredly going to be appreciated by potential candidates. When crafting the job description itself, what's involved, what are the qualifications, you want to think about asking yourself a question about each particular line is, if an otherwise perfect candidate came along but didn't have this particular aspect to their background or credential, but would otherwise be an amazing hire, then just get rid of it. Definitely want to avoid slang or any irrelevant terminology, because you want to be respectful for those who English is a second language, for example. I'd say those are great places to start.
And building on that or diving into that a little bit more, some people worry that that's giving away too much information or that it might cause internal rifts when they have that sort of stuff. How do you answer those sorts of concerns and fears?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this delves into, another topic of compensation, but there's the opportunity to make them standard across the organization or at the very least the role itself. But that is a tricky question. I'm not sure how to rectify that or reconcile that within the organization amongst the current staff.
So sometimes you have to build slowly to be able to get there and be effective.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So building on the next stage after you've got good diverse group of people coming in the door, there's some interesting pieces on culture, and like culture fit was a growing trend, and I still hear quite a ton. But you've got a different take on what's a good culture fit, or even something I've heard you call culture contribution. You share a little bit more about that, how you look for it, how you screen, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I think people are becoming more familiar with the term culture add versus culture fit. And the idea is that diversity increases fitness of all systems. And so for an organization, there's a lot of research out there. So for an organization to truly innovate, they need to have not only diversity in terms of demographics and background, but also just in ways of being, doing, and thinking. So for example, a lot of times organizations will look to see, do we have dreamers, blockers, and doers? Are we heavy in the dreamers or in the blockers? And if so, it's very much an impediment in innovation and just, the day-to-day of getting things done. So that's very important. I don't know so much you could tell that from a candidate's resume, although you probably in many instances you can, but you're definitely going to tease that out in the initial interview.
How are there certain questions that are useful for drawing that out or figuring that out during the interview?
That's a good question. Let's really prepare for that one. I would say to tease that out with questions, there's not a really specific question that's going to tease that out. It's going to be through conversing with that individual and learning more. So when you ask them to give examples about past times where they've approached similar problems for that particular role, you're definitely going to see what mindset they go at problems with.
So how can you draw out some of these dreamer blocker doer skills or other less obvious talents, especially ones that don't line up with the job descriptions?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Travis. I really focus on trying to decipher from the resume, but also then interview about a learning mindset, a propensity towards curiosity, willingness to see things through, their level of integrity. Uh, I would say also just, do they approach problems with creativity? Do they enjoy being creative? Not necessarily just in their work life, if they describe creativity in their personal life. Also along those lines, if I hear stories of moving past adversity in one's personal life, that's also an indicator. In fact, Google, because there's have been scaling dramatically for so long, we're eventually running out of people to hire. And so they needed to revamp how they were approaching and what they prioritized. And it was that they were just looking for individuals who had overcome adversity in their personal, often in their personal and or professional life.
So giving people a little bit broader range of material to draw from that you're looking for excellence in. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, oh, you've done that excellent thing in a job that looks just like this.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also looking for, does this person feel comfortable speaking up and dissenting against the popular opinion in an organization around a given initiative or project? Because if one person is willing to dissent, then you're largely opening up that door and increasing the innovation in your company.
Describing the role that somebody might be in, as well as the organization, has gotten trickier. Organizations are changing quicker, teams are changing their makeup quicker. Does does it matter? Is it okay to take a more general view? Is it worth when is it worth diving in and getting really detailed and getting really precise on how you describe the organization and the team? And are there any tricks for doing that well?
Mhm. I mean, ideally on day one, right? Because you want to attract talent that is sharing similar values of the organization, that thoroughly understands what the compensation and benefits are, who understands the career trajectory of the role, the culture of the organization. So I strongly urge companies to have a career page where they include this information. A great example is a tech startup in San Francisco Bay Area called Abstract Ops. And if you go to their website and look at, you're going to see just an immense amount of information. They've gone into such intricate detail. Now, this is like best case scenario, definitely not required. But I would also add that when doing this, you would also want to include your diversity statistics and your approach to applying racial justice to not only the recruitment process, but to the entire organization and the way it operates.
So kind of speaking towards the diversity piece, we all have some sort of natural biases to a greater or lesser extent. So how do we handle that in the recruiting process?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done, but I say to begin, the most powerful process you can put in place is to have multiple assessors at each step. So reviewing resumes, reviewing the notes from the initial interview and deciding who moves forward in subsequent interviews using the same process. Um, there's a lot of research that shows that it's very difficult for an individual to take their biases and set them right over here while they're interviewing someone, or in any scenario, really. Mhm. So I would recommend that. I would also say to review resumes, at the beginning, do that in the first part of your day. There's research that shows if you do it later in the day, your implicit bias starts to creep in a little bit more just because your brain is fatigued, right?
So decision fatigue like wears us out on that front as well.
hmm And then finally, you also want to have, because of that implicit bias, and the supervisor manager tends to be someone in the C-suite or at the executive level. What ends up happening is they just hire a lot of individuals just like them. And so they should be involved at the very end of the process, perhaps in the final interview, or even just involved in the final hiring decision, right? So they've never even met the candidate, and they certainly weren't reviewing resumes to decide who was initially interviewed.
So talking about bias, sometimes you got to look at the evaluation process. How do we make sure it's fair, inclusive, justifiable?
hmm That's a great question. I mean, there's so the best possible way to predict future job performance is to test one's cognitive ability and level of integrity. So you're going to clock in around 26% for, asking questions that tease that ability out, and then another 10% for their level of integrity. So how likely are they to see things through to, or ideas, projects, what have you, through to completion? But if you were to take one indicator, the best possible way is with a work product. And this is often missed as an identifier. Most people who interview like to say, I know how to choose the best possible candidate. But, there's the whole idea of, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So let that candidate take the skills and experience they developed in their past roles and do a work product. It can be relatively simple. It can be answering a series of questions in a certain amount of time. It could be developing a plan for something that's not related to the organization's strategy in any way, because you don't want them to feel as though you're tapping them for ideas and they might not actually receive an offer. You also want to after presenting what the work product would be, or in tandem, have a live conversation so that candidates can ask questions about what's expected of the work product. You can describe it in detail in written form, but I guarantee how many times you look that over and revise it, the candidate is still going to have clarifying questions. You want to make sure that everyone has been given the same amount of time to complete the work product. If giving them, say 48 hours to complete it, and it's not being done at a specific time. And then I say, for equity purposes, to compensate candidates for that time. You're only doing this work product for the top 2 or 3 candidates, right? And so it's really not a huge burden on the organization to compensate them for that.
Excellent. Hey, so these are phenomenal tips. I'm sure everybody's been enjoying them. Hopefully, people taking notes. We'll link to some resources on these as well. And so thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'm happy to be of assistance in any way I can to organizations that are looking to recruit.
So if somebody would want to find you, where would be the best place to find you?
My website, which is noyes-works.com. That's noyes-works.com.
Excellent. We'll link to that as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a good rest of your day.